got there in the end. Hmm.
I don't know why that is happening
Yeah.
like that, but it is. Okay.
Great. Okay. So, oh, isn't technology wonderful?
Yeah, well, I've been to this rodeo before.
Yes.
I give
So,
up on it.
yeah. So you had a nice week so far.
Yeah, so the rain has stopped here in, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. My family came here in 1845.
Right.
So it was before the gold rush.
Mhm.
And so the Donner Party were latecomers to us.
Mm.
That's what I claim.
Yeah.
And so I still live. I was born in San Francisco. I still live in across the bay in Berkeley,
Hmm.
and I have a little ranch up in the wine country, and so I go back and forth. I go up there, especially in the summer, because it's a really beautiful. It was the town is called Anderson, or the area is called Anderson Valley. It's part of the sort of the new uh, wine country. It's a Pinot Noir specialty, and
Hmm.
it's only about 30 minutes from the ocean.
Wow.
So it's that combination of cool air, hot days in the summer, but it drops like 50 degrees sometimes, so it's cool in the evening, and the Pinot grape apparently loves that.
Yeah.
Before that, it was all apples and sheep and timber, especially redwood.
Ah, right.
So the rain has finally stopped here. As everyone has heard, California goes through these droughts,
Mm.
and they usually last about 7 years. At least that's our family's experience.
Right. Yeah.
So my history is that I became interested in filmmaking in college.
Hmm.
I was first in college, and I couldn't get into a film school right away, so I started writing articles about films
Yeah.
and trying to pass them off in my Western history classes or any classes that I took,
Hmm.
to sort of uh, tread water and buy time until I could get into film school, which I finally did.
Mm.
And then when I was in film school, I made a film about the black boxing champion, Jack Johnson, who was famous in the later film, mine came first, um, called The Great White Hope.
Mm.
So this was about a famous boxing match where the first black heavyweight champion had to go up against the old white champion. And it was extremely racist, but Johnson won so uh, um, substantially
Mm.
that it really changed the temper in the country.
Yeah.
And it gave Black people something to cheer about. So, anyway, I made that in college kind of as my thesis, and I got it distributed. I got a national distributor, McGraw Hill,
Mm.
and that was unusual. Student filmmakers did not make films that got sold.
Mm.
So I was able to do that. And then I was lucky enough to get a job in post production in San Francisco, which
Mm.
was another rarity. And I was a documentary filmmaker. And my thinking at the time was if I could just get a job somewhere in the industry and then still be able to make my films on the side, weekends, vacations, whatever, I'd be a happy camper.
Mm.
And so I was able to do that. Uh, I got this post production job in a studio that did everything. They did animation, they did processing, they did editing. They had a stage where they shot things, they did television shows. It was a learning experience. And when I got through that, I knew how to make a movie.
Mm.
Now, there are not very many film directors out there. and there never has been, who can make a movie. I mean, they can direct a movie, but someone like George Lucas, he can make a movie. He can make it all himself.
Yeah.
And if you give him 100 pounds of film in 3 months, he can come back with a movie that he shot, that he edited, that he did everything on, and he could deliver it to you. And if you look at his student films, that's the proof right there that he could do that. He made THX 1138, and it won the National Student Film Festival. And it later, he was able to make it into his first feature film. Now, the film was not a big success or anything, but it got his foot in the door, because when you go down to Hollywood, you kind of make a statement. I had a friend who came down as a sound man. Well, every time he wanted to do something else, they would say, wait a minute, you're a sound guy. So I was lucky enough to go down there. The first time I actually went down there, I had a movie in my hand called American Nitro, and they took it to all the studios. And this was a time when the studios were just had been inundated with inundated, that's the word, with young films like Easy Rider. And of course, these were old white guys. They don't know what the hell was going on. So they were willing to look at anything, especially, it's a completed movie. All they had to do was buy it if they liked it. And they wound up buying mine. I mean, I was able to get in enough to where the big studios wouldn't touch it. But I remember a couple of the studio guys called me back and explain why it wasn't right for them. I mean, they did not want to burn any bridges with people, because they don't know who the hell I could become. Look at what happened to some of these other guys. So that was just a lesson that I learned. If you're going to go down there as a writer, then you're going to be seen as a writer, especially if you get a credit or something, or a camera operator or whatever. It's very hard to break out of those. Maybe a little easier now, but it was tough back then.
Yeah. Am I right that Francis Ford Coppola had something to do with the Jeffries Johnson film that you did?
Right. So George and Stephen decided they would like to get out of the Hollywood cage and go to a place that has no direct connection to Hollywood. It had a fine history. I mean, the fashion photographer, or I should say society photographer, in the late 1800s, Muybridge, basically created the first motion picture from his having got an assignment from the ex-governor, Leland Stanford, to photograph his horse, Occident, which was a trotting horse. And they set up 24 cameras, and they devised a shutter system where you could run the trotting horse pulling his little carriage past the 24 cameras, and the shutters were so fast, a shutter that had not been developed. I mean, it had a spring latch on it that just slammed it open and shut. And they were able to capture time. They were able to stop time. And this has never happened before in the history of man. They stopped time. So you could see a horse frozen in different poses as he trotted. And the question was, does a trotting horse ever have all 4 feet off the ground at the same time? And the answer was yes. So when this was published, these images went around the world, and artists all over the world, major artists that had painted horses, it gave them a total new insight. They were not painting horses correctly. And I went to a show, I think it was Matisse in San Francisco one time, and he had a copy amongst the things they displayed was his copy of Muybridge's famous book of stills. And so anyway, like I say, movies started there. And movies, I think, developed there because of the fallout from the gold rush. There's one famous writer who wrote that the West Coast was a place that resembled what would happen if you stood the United States on its end and everything that wasn't nailed down rolled into California. And that's about where we are. The people that came here left the farm because they wanted something different. And they created a whole new world of ideas. And that has not stopped. You'll notice that where Silicon Valley is. You'll notice where digital filmmaking was created. Why wasn't it created in Hollywood? I mean, Hollywood's the motion picture capital of the world. Why not New York? Fine motion picture set up there. But it didn't happen there. It happened in San Rafael, California, where I worked. It happened from George Lucas's trying new stuff and not having to do what everybody had done before. So that's why George and George and Coppola, Francis, moved to San Francisco, and they were on Folsom Street, and they had a company called American Zoetrope, and it was all set up because Francis was a screenwriter, and he got co-credit for the movie Patton, which was a hit. And once again, studios were like, what's going on? Maybe we should give these guys some money. So they gave him some money for THX and that other string of films. THX flopped. They demanded all the money back, and it was a disaster until Coppola agreed to direct The Godfather. And George, when I was there, I met with Coppola. I had this Jack Johnson film, which wasn't done yet, but they allowed filmmakers to leave a film off, and every Friday everybody that worked at Zoetrope would sit around and drink beer and watch whatever people had sent in. And so I'm coming back to my apartment in San Francisco, and I open the door. We'd been away for the weekend, and the phone is ringing, and I pick it up, and the lady says, "I've been trying to get hold of you. Francis Coppola has seen your movie, and he wants to talk to you." Well, what young filmmaker wouldn't go nuts with that? Because these were the only guys that we were able to look up to, because they were about our age and they were doing stuff. They weren't just sitting writing screenplays and making bologna sandwiches to keep themselves alive until they got discovered. They were actually out there making their own films. And they were doing that because they knew how to make films, or at least George did. Francis is a different kind of director, but I'm sure, I know he made his own films too, but he would bring in lots and lots of people to help him finish it. I remember reading Spielberg said he tried to sit down and learn how to edit, and pretty soon he was crawling under the table trying to find the splicing tape that he was all thumbs. And so, he has his own specialty, and that's that has served him well. So you have to pick your area. So I made that film with some help from Coppola, and they tried to hire me, and I said, well, I just got this job and I can't disappoint them. And he said, oh, that's very noble of you. I could just read that he was thinking, what is this idiot doing, turning this down? But the place was closed a few months later, so I made the correct decision. Now, then it was open again a year later, and they were back in big time business. So anyway, I got a little help from Francis there, and that was much appreciated.
I mean, what drew you to the subject matter to begin with? First of all, very much a Black History film, and then
the Jack Johnson movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, it happened. It was originally going to happen in San Francisco, and then San Francisco threw it out, and so it happened in Reno, Nevada, which is not that far from here.
Hmm.
Now, my brother is a boxing aficionado. He's
Yeah.
about 5 years older than I am.
Hmm.
And he had led me to this story of this personality who was like an early Muhammad Ali, who was not taking guff from anybody and was
Hmm.
doing his own life. And he was brash and he was talented. And so I decided that it seemed to me that the turning event in all of this was this fight that happened ultimately in Reno, where they coaxed this old champion out of retirement. He was undefeated. He was Jim Jeffries. He was the White Hope.
Hmm.
And Jack London covered the fight. And Jack, unfortunately, was a bit of a racist. And so were all the reporters. And I thought, okay, here's a story that confronts racism uh, in this country and around the world. And a type of hero comes out of it, who is Jack Johnson. Now, he's later, uh, they bring him down eventually.
Hmm.
And the president here lately um, pardoned him after what 100 years or however long it's been. It was 1910 when the fight happened. It was in the 30s when he was convicted on a trumped up charge of transporting a woman across state lines
Hmm.
for immoral purposes. Now, it just so happened it was his wife, but or later became his wife.
Hmm.
But anyway, I thought that was something, and I thought there's a lot of young Black people in the country never heard about this guy,
Hmm.
and should hear his story because he is, warts and all, he is a type of hero, and his story is compelling. So that's why I wanted to make it, and I was
Hmm.
able to make it out of rare motion picture footage and a lot of still photographs that I had collected around the world, actually. And
Hmm.
so it's got some rare stuff in it, and so I'm restoring it now, and the same thing I did with American Nitro. I restored that. I got the rights back from the studio, and I have re-released it. I re-released it in 2009,
Hmm.
and I sell it on DVD. And when I first started selling it, I was selling it on videotape. But
Hmm.
now with the internet, I was able 9 years ago to have what I call a triangle.
Hmm.
I show it on. Uh, I let people know about it on Facebook.
Hmm.
I have a Facebook page for the movie that has 735,000 people on it. There's that many fans of this
Hmm.
early type of racing, drag racing, the
Hmm.
same racing that was in American Graffiti. And so I called mine American Nitro. Uh, this ability to advertise it on Facebook, at least let people know about it, run a trailer on YouTube, and collect the money with PayPal
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
a breakthrough because it meant you could get paid before you sent the movie out.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whereas before I was sending it out UPS or asking for a check or something, and it was laborious and tiresome.
Hmm.
So the movie did about 1.2 million in theatrical release. And of course, we had to sue to get our cut. But with selling the DVDs, which cost me 50 cents to make, and I sell it for $25,
Hmm.
we've been able to double our take. And so that was nice to have. It's a 40-year-old movie, but
Hmm.
it turns out if you make a movie for people who are passionate about something, it could
Yeah.
be old shotguns, it could be certain types of cars, it could be, trains or antique aircraft, any of these things.
Hmm.
It's not a large enough audience to release a major motion picture, usually. I mean, they've tried all kinds of sports films that have passionate fans. and most of them don't work. Some do. But for a young filmmaker to make a movie that exploits a genre that at least a small group of people, maybe a few 100,000, are intensely interested in, they're going to buy your movie.
Yeah.
They're going to go into the store and they're going to go to the shelf. I tell people, if you make a horror film, there's actually a place for it in the video store. There's a section and it says horror movies, and that's where your movie goes. It goes right in that slot, and the store owner can understand that. Whereas you make some esoteric underground film, it's like, what the hell am I going to do with this? I mean, it may be a great film. Probably, there's a chance it is if you put that much passion into it. But look for a slot to start out. Look for something that has a ready-made audience. They're already there. They're waiting for you to make the film.
Yeah. Because American Nitro was very important to your career, because that's how you got into ILM, I believe.
Yes. So I had a career of making my own movies, and I got somewhere with that. But I almost always had a side job because you want to have a fallback position. And if you're some kind of artist type, you need a steady job because you're a painter or you're a writer, and the chances of you being able to support yourself are slim, although it does happen. You keep at it. So I had some friends there that worked there. You see, it was unusual to have Lucasfilm up here in Northern California. We hired a lot of locals simply because Hollywood people couldn't really afford to come up here and bring their family and rent a house or buy a house or whatever. Because when the film was done, they couldn't just walk across the street to another studio and get another job. There weren't any other studios until later. And so we hired a lot of people. We had a ex-cable car conductor. We had a guy whose grandfather invented the Yellow Pages. We had a guy who did the ski stunt. He had been on the Swiss rescue team, and he did the ski stunt on the opening of a James Bond film. There were a lot of unusual people, and I always thought that somehow that diverse group of oddball characters leaked over into the movies in some unknowable way. So I come along and I've got this drag racing movie that I bring. And again, like the Zoetrope group, on Friday afternoon, everybody got a bunch of beer and they went to the D screening room and they ran a film. So I brought this drag racing film and I showed it. And about a minute or so into it, somebody yelled out, "Has George seen this?" They knew he was into hot rod cars and had made TV. And I was working there a month later. I'd never worked in 35 millimeter. I didn't know the ropes, but I knew how to make a movie. I had done it myself. And a lot of the people in visual effects tend to focus on a single scene or a single occupation. They do stop motion. I mean, these are very talented people, it's no question. Genius level in some cases. They won Oscars. But I was hired as a visual effects editor and later wound up running that department and the commercial department. And I was told that they were looking for somebody who had the sense of this is just one shot in a sequence of shots, and it has to integrate, and there has to be some understanding of that whole dynamic of filmmaking. It's not about one shot, it's about a sequence and how it all flows. And I had some sense of that.
I mean, you say your role was visual effects editor. What does that? What would that role encompass?
So what that entails is these shots were done primarily of models or miniatures or matte paintings or inserts to matte paintings where they would paint a beautiful matte painting, but they would leave a center. They usually painted them on glass if they were going to do a rear projection.
Hmm.
So that famous scene from Indiana Jones, where they're moving the ark into the warehouse, into this gigantic government warehouse, and they're rolling the big crate on a dolly. There's one guy rolling it into this gigantic warehouse. Well, the gigantic warehouse was a matte painting, and there was a section that was not painted, it was glass. And they rear projected the guy into that and rephotographed it with the guy moving and the matte painting being the background. And I believe there was even a pullback on that. So very sophisticated types of work was being done there. And my job was to collect all this together. They would shoot a spaceship on the stage in front of a blue screen. Okay. So the ship never moved. The camera moved. The camera moved past the ship. But when you take out everything and all you have is a ship that is moved, appearing to move towards you because you have no point of reference, it seems to zoom past the camera because you have moved in on it and there's nothing else. So you get a bunch of these ships and a starfield background and a planet and a Death Star and God knows what else, some explosions. And the ships are shot on a computer controlled rig that can exactly repeat the motion of your moving the camera past the ship. So you do what they call a beauty pass. The beauty pass is the ship lit. Then you do a light pass. Then you do an engine pass. You do all these passes because they will fit precisely into the beauty pass, the lights and the engines. But if you want to increase the brightness of the engines or the lights or decrease them, you can do so independently. You do not diminish the beauty pass. You don't have to bring them all up or down. So all of these elements have to be choreographed and put together by me and sent to optical for compositing. So I would work on a giant VistaVision moviola. We worked in VistaVision. This was a format that was devised by Hollywood to compete with television back in the late 50s, early 60s. It was, okay, you're watching TV, compare it to this. We'll give you a screen that's 70 feet wide and 45 feet high and see how you can compete with that. So VistaVision had a negative area 4 times the size of 35 millimeter. Well, George realized that if you wanted to do composites on special effects shots and you wanted them to integrate with your beautifully shot live action, you were going to go through a reduction process in optical. But if you started out with images that were so huge and sharp, by the time you got them down to 35 millimeter Panavision, say, and cut it into your movie, you're not going to notice when you go from a regular shot to an effects shot. It's not going to build up in grain or contrast or anything. So you have more control.
Yeah.
So all these elements would come back. The forest sequence for the bike chase in Jedi, that was all backgrounds of the forest shot with a steady cam with a VistaVision camera mounted on it and shot at a slow speed that one projected at 24 frames a second. Back to Maya Bridges, 24 cameras. That's why it's 24 frames a second.
Yeah.
You had a believable look to it. And then you could lay in the characters sitting on their speeder bikes in front of a blue screen, grimacing and having wind blown in their hair or whatever, and get like a passable bike chase, because it's cut so fast and there's so many things happening that you were like, what? And another device of George's, keep it moving and have so much detail that you got to come back and see it again, maybe more than once, because you missed a lot, because there was a lot in there. And you can also get away with murder. On the original Star Wars, you got away with all kinds of stuff that shouldn't have been able to. I mean, it was just like, wait a minute, if you slow that down, are we going to buy that? We would look in at the shots when they came out of optical. I'd throw all these elements together, and it would go over with an instruction sheet of how they're to put it together. And I would first do a temporary black and white of this in 35 millimeter. It would be reduced down to 35 black and white. I'd send it to George. He'd cut it into his movie, and then there would be notes that would come back to me that would say, you know, add a ship here. There's too much action on one side. Let's have something happen on the other. And I would redo it. It would go to him again, and he would cut it in. And if it worked, great. So then it would come into dailies after we had made a color composite. So that would show up on the screen. Excuse me, I got a cold.
Yeah, I had a cold last month myself, so it's I think.
Well, we're all worried it's COVID or something. But,
oh yes, yeah.
So we would grade the shots, temp, CVB, or final. Now that would be graded by the supervisor. I worked for Ken Ralston, and then it would go to George, and he would say yay or nay. Should it be redone? You know, and these were important decisions, because, like, if you say it's CBB, that means in our shorthand could be better. In other words, we would not be embarrassed for the director to cut this into his movie, because we worked for other directors as well as George. But it could, if we have time, we will go back and fix those and make them as perfect as we can, because we know that the whole world is looking at this stuff. And there was one little kid in Japan who would write Ken letters and say, you know, there was this or that problem, you know, in this shot. And Ken would say, okay, let's do it one more time for that kid in Japan, because I don't want to get another letter from him. So then we would send them. I'd pack them up in a can and send them to the live action cutting room, say, of Spielberg or, you know, Ron Howard or whoever the director was. They cut it in, and then they would either agree or disagree. We almost never said anything that wasn't something that they would accept. Now, one time we had sent a temp to Clint Eastwood for a movie I worked on called Blood Work. And it's basically, there was a shot where Eastwood, who's a cop, gets a shot in a convenience store robbery. And there is a video camera that captured this, and I don't remember why, but it was a shot that he wanted in the movie. So we did a temp and we sent it to him, and he cut it in the movie. We never heard anything about it again, and we started perfecting it, you know, taking it from temp to CVB to final. So we sent him down the final, and he calls up and he says, no, you don't understand. this is coming from a video camera in a convenience store. I want it to look like the temp, not like this beautiful thing you sent.
Yeah.
Doesn't, doesn't make any sense. So we were like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
So we degraded it or something and sent it back to him, and he was happy.
Mm.
So the director could reject. And I remember one time Spielberg objected to a shot in Indy. I think it was one of the later ones. Anyway, it looked kind of bad, but it's the best we could get. And he called up George and said, you got to come down and help me out here. So we strung it up in the projection booth and projected it for George. And somehow we convinced him, it doesn't get any better than that. So Stephen was out of luck. But later, when digital came in, he had us fix that shot for him.
Mm.
Now I know there's a lot of controversy about George going back to Star Wars and changing things, and Jedi and Empire, and this is what directors do. They don't like the looks of something; they want to fix it. And it's not just film directors; it's writers.
Yeah.
Doug Fitzgerald went back and corrected stuff.
Mm.
And I tell the story of, let's say that you were a big shot in New York in the 50s or early 60s, and you have a Picasso. And so you invite your friends over to see it. You bought it at auction, you paid, a ton of money for it. And Picasso's still alive, and he shows up and he's looking at his painting and he says, I always wanted to add a little green there, but I couldn't afford it. Would you mind? So what are you going to do? You're going to tell Picasso, no, you can't. You can't. This is the way it is. And that's essentially what George did. And I can understand it. Now, I can't understand it if the studio or anybody else is doing it. But if the original artist decides to do it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And it's not like the original versions don't exist. They're not going to release them probably for a while, but they're there.
Yeah.
And they're on old VHS tapes. There's a funny thing about people who collect VHS tapes. Some of those tapes are the only version of the movie that is ever going to exist, because the studios do not want to remake them. They don't want to restore them. They don't want to spend the money, but mostly they don't want to have to buy the music rights, which have expired and are very expensive. So there are people out there who have videotapes that are the only existing print or version of some fairly famous films that are never going to appear again, or at least, unless the Smithsonian Institution gets involved, or Library of Congress or something.
Yeah. I mean, you were saying that George was giving you notes on shots for Return of the Jedi, but of course with Empire and Jedi, he wasn't directing the films. But so but he was still very much in charge of it.
He was definitely the person in charge of his movie, and he hired a director after he got done with directing himself, because it's exhausting, and it is I think he would admit he's not that great with actors. He has only a few directions, which are faster, slower, try it again, some stuff like that. He's not calling the actress aside and, I'm not saying he doesn't do this or never did this, but he's not exactly a person who, like Coppola is. I heard Coppola talking to an actor one time, trying to convince him to do the shot again. And what he said was, it's not as if what you did was bad or wrong. It's just that everything that you had done before that was so good that I don't want this to go through any less.
Mm.
And what's the guy going to say? Of course, you know. uh, so him taking on directors uh, was like he can do all this himself,
Mm.
but he has camera people and he has editors and he has all kinds of specialists that can do it on a time and schedule that is horrific. I mean, we would do, you know, 300 shots, and then the next movie we would do 1,000 shots, special effects shots. George has got his own money in these movies.
Mm.
The original one, Star Wars, he never owned. The studio owned that.
Mm.
He was a hired hand. And if you don't own your own movie, you wind up like Buster Keaton. Charlie Chaplin owned his own movies, and he wound up in Geneva, Switzerland, in a palace. And Buster Keaton did not own his movies, and he wound up in the Valley in LA with his movies. You know, he had some prints of them in his garage. Big difference. So George realized early on, you got to own your own movies. That means you have to put up your own money, or you have to sign up with a bank and borrow the money, and you better be able to pay it back, or you're on the hook for it.
Yeah.
Now, on Empire, he ran out of money. He had to go back to the bank, and the bank said sequels don't make money, so they wouldn't give it to him. But he was lucky enough to get the toy money finally came in from the original Star Wars, which they sold so many of them they ran out. They were late for Christmas, and they were giving kids notes in an empty box saying the toy is coming. You know, that money came in, saved him. But ultimately, he got the lion's share of the gross from Empire and Jedi and anything else that he made like that, as opposed to American Graffiti and Star Wars. Now he did some deals later. Maybe he wound up with the rights to the original Star Wars. I don't know, but it's all owned by Disney now, so it's a moot point. But it is important to realize that when he was hiring these other directors, he was hiring them like he would hire a camera operator. You know, he famously turned down Vilmos Zsigmond to shoot one of the Star Wars films, I think it was, because he said the guy wants $1 million. You know, and you know, if you've made your own movies, you're reluctant to pay somebody $1 million for something you can do on your own.
Yes.
And you don't maybe. I asked him a question one time. He had brought a copy of a movie down to show us. I think it was THX, and so you know, in our tradition, after you know the evening on a Thursday night or something, we'd go to one of the theaters and run a movie, and he brought THX and he showed it and he said, I'll answer questions. And then when he was done, he said, now, if you get American Graffiti, I'll do the same thing. So we did. And after the movie, I asked him a question. I said, you know, I know, George, that you're digital 24/7 now. He was inveighing all of us that we had to go digital. Editing was like scratching on rocks, he said. And so he was trying to convince Hollywood, who didn't want to hear it, and he was trying to convince us. But I said, is there any nostalgia for the look of American Graffiti, which you've just, you know, shown us? I mean, that beautiful, it was shot in Techniscope, which is where you take a 35 millimeter frame and you make 2 movie frames out of it. saving you 50% on your film costs.
Hmm.
And so when you blow that up to full 35 millimeter, it gives it a little more grain. And in that night photography, I thought it came out just brilliantly, with the neon lights and the grain and the darks and the lights. So he says, no, I don't have any nostalgia for it. I'm not known as a cinematographer or for my cinematography. I'm known for my storytelling. And that's what I care about.
Yeah.
So I was disappointed to hear it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films. But I think he was influenced by how hard he was trying to get the world to accept digital filmmaking.
Yeah, very much had one foot on the future really, and wasn't looking back, trying to sort of break new ground, wasn't he really?
Right. So I mean, a lot of cinematographers and all of Hollywood went kicking and screaming into the digital future.
Yeah.
And they've all gotten there now, except for one who says, what he said something like, I didn't sign up for this. I'm still shooting film. That's Tarantino. Yeah. I don't know if he's changed his mind or not. Because we had Oliver Stone out one time. George had all his directors, major directors, out to the ranch where he showed them a bunch of things that could be done with digital. It's not just for creating monsters or spaceships. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff. And Oliver Stone just went up to him and said, look, I don't need any of this crap. I shoot on film and blah, blah. I don't. Well, about 2 or 3 months later, he calls us and he says, well, I've got this problem and could you guys help out with that? And I don't know this, but I think it was the shot in Wall Street where you see the city, you see the downtown Wall Street area, and the buildings are having a ticker tape numbers of Wall Street moving up and down the buildings. It's just kind of a montage sequence, and it was very effective. So once directors got convinced that we could help them, I mean, I gave a lecture one time at the University of Indiana, and I brought a clip of film from Saving Private Ryan, which I worked on. Okay, so there's one shot in that movie. The soldier, it's the cleanup operation after the D-Day invasion. It's the beach. And so it starts out, there's a Jeep and a bunch of soldiers go by the camera, and the camera is on a dolly and it's going up, 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 up to where you can see down to the beach. Okay, so first I put the background plate that Spielberg sent us, where there's nothing on the beach. It's just a sand beach. Now there's a couple of iron things in the sand that the Germans had put there, and those were there, I think, or at least some of them.
Yeah.
Then I showed it after we got done with that shot. In other words, what we put on there. We put all the soldiers marching up and down the beach, the jeeps, the tanks, all the landing barges, all the ships, all the blimp-like balloons, all of this stuff. And I showed it in sequence of how there was nothing, and then we added the soldiers, and then and then at the end, I took it all out and showed it just sitting there alone. So at the cocktail party, these history professors came up to me, and they were extremely upset. This is dangerous. They thought that we just did monsters and spaceships. They didn't realize what we were capable of doing, that we could recreate history to a certain extent. Yeah. And they found that frightening, like we were making, the famous Triumph of the Will, propaganda. They were seeing how it could be propagandized.
Hmm.
And I could look, fellas, this is what we do. We make movies. These are fantasy stories, but they wouldn't hear of it. They felt that I just could not understand how this could lead to bad things. And so that's just the nature of. I used to say every movie, every cowboy movie that any of us has ever seen, where there's a barroom fight and one cowboy breaks a beer bottle over the head of another cowboy. That's a breakaway movie prop beer bottle made to look real, but also made to not hurt the cowboy because he's just an actor. Okay, so when we recreate that scene using digital beer bottles, what do we make it look like? Do we make it look like the beer bottle we've always seen in movies going back to Tom Mix, or do we make it look like an actual real bottle busting in slow motion? Which one do you want? Which is so ingrained in our movie history knowledge? The world that the movies paint for us is a different world. We understand if it's a cowboy movie, there's certain tropes, there's certain things about that make it a cowboy movie in our brain. And if you change it, you might have to be careful how you do it, because maybe people expect something, and you need to not disappoint them.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's giving people the expectations of. I think there was on your website there was the documentary you did on the Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs and everything.
Yeah, I made that documentary with my friend Mike Gleason. He was the editor, did a fantastic job. I directed it, and the whole. I once had a guy when I worked at post production in San Francisco. The head of that company once said to me, "Films are an illusion. You have to understand that." And that came from the fact that someone came to us, and the owner, Bill Palmer, had invented a kinescope camera. So what a kinescope camera is if you wanted to transfer a videotape to film so you could project it for an audience, you couldn't really, the video projection in those days was terrible. So if you did it anything other than a video screen, a small video screen, it was extremely hard to get enough quality. So anyway, a company brought us a videotape and said, please make a film out of it so we can project it, because we're going to have this big meeting. And so we did it, and they looked at it and they said, "Oh, this doesn't look good. This doesn't, it just doesn't work." And the owner, Bill Palmer, very brilliant engineer, audio engineer, basically, but he can do everything. He said, "Oh, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into their auditorium, and we're going to make a black TV-like screen, that has that curved thing. And then we're going to put some knobs below this fake TV screen, and we're going to project into that. We're going to project our film into that." We brought the lights down, we projected it, and it looked fantastic because the setting was familiar to us. It was like a giant television, and that's what you expect to see. And when you expect to see something, that's what you see. And that's the trick of magic and special effects, showing people what they expect to see, taking them right up to the edge of the cliff, and then pulling them back.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the release and the laugh or the wow. Uh, we had a guy who was shooting he was the camera operator for shooting Indiana Jones, the mine sequence, where we had built a little mine car and we put a Nikon camera on it because it was, miniature. But we wanted the point of view of the mine car,
Yeah.
of the little actors. So at one point, the camera is looking right out as the car raises up and then turns and goes down. So the camera operator took a video camera and he went down to Santa Cruz where they have a big roller coaster, and he mounted his camera and did the, going over and then going down. And he noticed that the thing that was so scary was that as you're going up, you're looking, and what you're seeing is the sky. Sky. Then there's this tilt when the roller coaster goes over the hump, and now you're looking straight down. And that bit of up, and then that is where the thrill was, and that's how he did it in this stop motion Nikon camera simulating a VistaVision camera. You shoot enough stop motion frames of VistaVision and you print them in an optical printer and you've got a motion picture.
Yeah.
Back to my bridge. It's still after still after still.
Before we leave Star Wars, we must talk about the iconic shot that's actually on the front of your autobiography behind you. Do you want to talk about that particular shot from Jedi?
Okay, this is what I'm talking about, folks.
Yeah.
This is my book. It's a memoir. If you're going to film school or you're thinking about getting into the entertainment industry, you need to read this book because I've been there, I've done that, and I've got some things to help you. I worked on a lot of movies, 25 movies or so, and I write about a lot of them here. And this is a still from Return of the Jedi, which was originally called Revenge of the Jedi, until some little kid wrote George and said, Jedis don't seek revenge. Nobody knows if that's true or not.
Yeah.
But this shot was SB-19, and it's the 19th shot in the space battle in Revenge of the Jedi, or Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
It'll always be revenge to me because I got so many coffee cups and T-shirts and posters and stuff that say revenge that that's what I signed on for. So I call it revenge.
Yeah.
So anyway, again, this business about special effects shots, excuse me, either integrated with live action or one effect shot after another. So this shot is the largest shot that was ever done on an optical printer. This is before everything went digital, quite a time before that. And so this was given to me to put together. Ken Ralston and George and Joe Johnston, they were the masterminds, the designers. I'm just a flunky down the line putting the thing together, but not everything that was shot worked. And so I fooled around with it on a Moviola. It had 63 elements. There's a video on my Facebook page inside the Star Wars Empire, or you can just type in Bill Kimberlin and it will take you there, or you can type in BillKimberlin.com on the internet and it'll take you to my Facebook page. I mean, my author's page. Anyway, the guy that I worked for, the guy who ran the department at that time, said, I thought we'd be struggling with this shot for months because it had so many elements and it was so complicated. So it took me, I don't know, it took Ken I think he had 3 or 4 camera crews shooting these elements. And I would, when they shot the element, before they decided to load the film, these are the camera guys shooting the models on the big stage. Before they shot color, because remember, this is going to be in dailies tomorrow, and George is going to be looking at it. So, you want to do your job. And they would work out the move, with the computer and with the camera, going past the ship, where the camera goes past the ship. And there's subtleties. Sometimes the model could move a little bit. But in any case, they would load up a black and white strip of VistaVision. It was called an RAR. It was a rapid, I forget what RAR stands for, but it's a black and white film that can be rapidly processed, and you can throw it on a movie and check out your movie. And if it looks right, you load the color film. And these cameras are moving, click, click, click. It takes a while. And it takes a while to composite them too. So I would take all the RARs after they had approved them. They would mark them somehow. And there were so many ships, I would have to stack them and run them all together in this VistaVision Moviola, which is this giant machine that allows you to edit a VistaVision movie, these film strips. And by bypacking them together, because they're black images, just really silhouettes of ships against clear, I could bypack them and I could see a lot of the ships and how they ran together. If I put a stack of 5 of them and then I ran them, and now I had to deal with all the other garbage that was in the frame, because the optical is going to take out all the light stands and the grips standing around smoking cigarettes and stuff that is not part of the movie. It's being shot in effect a time lapse. So there's all this other stuff going on, but it's not the area where the ship is against the blue screen is protected. But we had these things called garbage mats where they would take out all that junk, but they wouldn't take it out for me. I would send these over the 5 strips, and I'd say, make 1 strip out of the 5. And then I'll take that one and pack it with another one that has 5 on it. And then another. I think I could get 3 or 4 together and see if the thing looks like it works. So I eventually get something, and I tell, there was the supervisor, I'm pretty sure I ran it for mine, Ken. And then there were a lot of PAs and people to call, and there was a coordinator. And I said, call George's cutting room, have him come over and look at it. So he comes over, I run it for him. He says, great, turns around and walks out. That's it. That's all you're ever going to get out of George Lucas is great. And I was lucky to get it. So then I put all the negative together. I shipped it to optical with an instruction sheet. Our instruction sheets were like an 8x11. Well, this shot had so many elements. I had to tape 4 instruction sheets together to get enough room for the instructions, which is the instructions are which ship, when a ship passes in front of another, it has to not be a superimposition. It has to look like it's actually passing in front of something. And that means they have to mat out the ship in the background. So when the foreground ship crosses, it doesn't bleed through.
Yeah.
And I made a mistake. And the first comp that's in the movie had an error in it. It was very brief. It was like a couple of frames. And I don't think anybody ever called it on us, but we didn't see it. And so it was pretty hard to spot. When they did the redo, somebody else did that shot digitally. And he came to me and he said, "If you got that crossover sheet?" And I said, "I can't find it." And so later for my book, I dug through everything and I found the crossover sheet. Didn't help him, but I do have it. And there's a copy of it in my book, and it's kind of crazy how big it was. And then Nova did a little show with Ken and I describing how the shot was done, and that's on my website. And that's kind of interesting. It's also on YouTube out there somewhere. And it's interesting to see how laborious this was. People in their comments say, what's the matter with this guy? And how do you do stuff like that? Keep your sanity.
You go from making your own films, editing, directing, and is this just to go into the world of visual effects? Is in some respects it doesn't seem to be a seamless transition, but you like, I suppose, it's that attention to detail and that sort of that visual effects.
I knew how to make movies. I had done a movie largely with still photographs and camera moves. I have a long history and appreciation for motion pictures. And like I said earlier, the fact that all these people came from different disciplines. There was a guy who was a high iron worker, a welder, that did the tops of buildings. And he was a master model maker, Mike Fulmer. He did the plane in one of the indie films where the plane crashes into the top of a snow-covered alpine mountain. He built that, and we shot it in the parking lot. We had a parking lot between two of our buildings. We had about 11 buildings, I'd say, A building, B building, C building. That's what we called them. I was in D building. And this company, Industrial Light and Magic, was located not at the big Skywalker 5,000 acre beautiful ranch. It was located down in the Canal District in San Rafael. And if you were to, and the first ILM in Los Angeles was also in a similar area. And if you were to look on a real estate zoning map, the zoning for this area would say light industrial. So all George had to do was add the word magic, and he had industrial, light, and magic. So we could do stuff there that we couldn't do at the beautiful ranch. You can't blow up a Star Destroyer at the ranch, but you can do it in the Canal District. Do anything you want down there. They were building, there were auto shops and paint shops and all these critical industrial occupations. When we shot Always, the fire sequence, Always is about a pilot who runs a tanker that dumps fire retardant on these forest fires. And so we rented, there's a place called Point Richmond across the Richmond Santa Fe Bridge from Marin. And we rented a warehouse there and brought in a bunch of miniature trees and lit them all on fire and had a model plane, but a huge one, like 18-foot wingspan. And we had it on a kind of a cable system and ran it, right through these burning trees. And it made a sequence that was just amazing. And so we had this producer who came up from Hollywood, and he was looking to do Die Hard, the movie.
Yeah.
Joel Silver. Joel Silver had brought in, I don't know how many billions of dollars in Hollywood movie revenue with his movies. And so we were trying to win the contract for Die Hard. So we took him into D Theater. We would often do this. We wouldn't necessarily do a lot of testing. We would tell people, we've done something similar before, and we'll show you what we've done. But we've learned a lot since then. And what we like to do is take real problems, your problems, and figure out how to do it. So we were all set to run this always incredible reel. When we would apply to the Academy for consideration of an Academy Award, we would cut what we call an Academy reel. In other words, we would cut a reel of all the visual effects, 20-minute reel, and none of the story.
Yeah.
Basically, it was just to showcase the effects. So we had this reel that most people have never seen. I don't know if anyone's ever seen these reels because they were just made for the Academy. We put them back on the shelf. And then when someone would come in with a job that we wanted to bid on, we'd show them the reel. And the one for Empire was the greatest friggin' reel I ever saw. I mean, you could sit, I don't care who you sat down in a room. And this was not too many years after we had made it. And you run that reel for them. They were just like, wow, because they'd never seen anything like that. And also another one that was really good. It was a poor movie, Pearl Harbor. If you saw the Pearl Harbor reel, that was just unbelievable. The work was so good. So we had a reel for always. And we had Joel Silver. And so we sat him down in the C screening room, which was this elegant George and Marcia designed Art Deco screening room that was built originally as a sound mixing room, and it was not attached. The mixing theater was not attached to the rest of the building. It hung in there so that the sound waves, from outside or inside would not radiate through all the timbers and the wires and stuff. And the doors were like 5 inches thick, and there were double doors with an airlock. And I never took anybody into that C screening room where I didn't open the door and they stepped in and they didn't say, wow, because it was very cool looking. And it's still there. So Joel sits down, we're about to run the film for him, and he turns around to us and he says, look, I have a friend in special effects, and I don't screw my friends. I'll look at your reel, but I don't screw my friends. He's doing the effects. Said, okay, run the film. So we ran the film for him. And when it got done, the lights came up and he said, that is the greatest freaking effects reel I ever saw in my life. You've got the job. So much for friends in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So those reels were effective in selling what we could do. And then we just had to convince them. And it was pretty easy to convince people in the beginning years because they'd seen all this amazing stuff that we had done. And we kind of had the world to ourselves. We were more expensive, but we guaranteed that the movie would get the effects they needed to release on time. This is everything. If you miss a release date, I remember George turning to us while we're working on Jedi, and we were late. Everything was very tightly scheduled, and he turned around and looked at us. George was not a screamer. He never yelled at anyone. He was a straight up guy. But he turned around and he said, this movie is going to be released on May 15th, 1983 or whatever it was. If it has work printed, It's going to be released. That's it. The seats are sold, period.
Hmm.
And that was a motivator right there. I mean, we all wanted to do the best job that we could. I mean, Jesus, who gets to work on Star Wars movies? And plus, we realized these were more than just movies. These were the hopes and dreams of every little kid in the world. And you want to disappoint them? You want to not do your job right? I don't think so. I mean, they used to come around, the local kids, go through the garbage, and because the model shop would throw away stuff that they were done with. You could find some cool stuff in there. And so one day we knew they were doing this, and a couple of my friends who worked in the mixing theater next door before it became, a daily theater, because George finally moved their crew up to the Skywalker Ranch, and they had the Stag Theater, and they had all the technical building and all this stuff to do their sound. They decided they were going to catch one of these kids, so they were going through the dumpster on a Saturday. So they ran out, and all the kids ran away except for this one small little boy. He was about 5, and he looked up on them and he said, "I didn't get anything." And they suddenly realized, what the hell are we doing? We're chasing children around. So they all wanted something to take back to grammar school the next day and show what they got. It was just a broken piece of a spaceship or something. Or maybe even only just a balsa wood version. But anyway, they took the kid in and gave him the A tour. Nobody got the A tour. This little 5-year-old got the A tour. And there was a Darth Vader model there, full size, 7 feet. There was R2D2, and there were all of these things that hadn't yet appeared in the world and weren't in video stores and stuff. So he had something to tell his buddies on Monday.
Yeah. Did he get to take anything home with him, or was it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think he was blown away by what he saw. But, he didn't have, it would have been nice if they'd given him something. And, they probably did. I don't know. I have to ask Gary Summers. He was the guy. Him and Ben Burt were the 2 guys that did that. And Ben Burt, of course, is the famous sound designer that, most people don't realize how important sound is. If you look at an old Hollywood movie and you listen to the voices of those actors, they came from the stage, they came from radio, they came from vaudeville, and those voices were magnetic. And a couple times I taught some college courses, and I have the students look at a film, a clip, silent, without sound. Then I have them listen to it without visuals, just the sound. So to emphasize how important this is and how you are led by that sound, by the music and the sound effects. These films are shot silent.
Yeah.
They do a scratch track, but later they use a technique called ADR, where the actor listens to his recorded voice through earphones and he mimics it, and the shot is looped for him, so he can do it over and over again until they figure they got it right.
Yeah.
Well, if you listen to the music cues, all the things that you miss when you're trying to study a film, you sit down and, I'm going to watch The Godfather and study it and see how it's made. Next thing you know, the movie's over and you're like, what happened? Because it's hard to be pulled out of it. So I like to talk about the scene in The Godfather where Michael decides that he is going to kill Sollozzo. It starts after this whole tirade of how his older brother has said, we got to kill this guy. And Robert Duvall says, well, you can't kill this guy. He's the captain of the police force. I mean, all our political contacts would run for cover. All the 5 families would turn against us. Anyway, then there's silence. Then Michael starts to talk. The camera is at the other end of the table. And as Michael starts to talk, the camera starts slowly moving in. You might not even notice it, but Michael lays out what he's going to do. If we can find a restaurant somewhere where he feels comfortable, if we can get it, get our people to find out, some of the background, if we can, if they can, our guy can hide a gun, and the camera's moving. So now the camera's right in on top of Michael, and he says, "Then I'll come along."
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful. But if the camera move, the whole tone of the thing is what makes it a masterfully compelling shot. And you don't necessarily realize that because we've sucked you in and we have control now. In a really good movie, it takes control of you in a certain way. And it's hard to think you're going to sit down and evaluate it. Now, a lot of people like to go and read the script. Well, almost all scripts are printed scripts of the finished movie. They don't show you what was turned in, by the writer. But that's what you want to study.
Yeah.
What was turned in. Why? Because if you think that what you read in the book is the script, then you're going to get depressed because you could never write something as good as that, because the movie now has had all the distinction of a director, an editor, a sound designer, all of these craftspeople working, cutting out scenes, changing this, changing that, and sometimes coming up with just a brilliant movie that no one should think they could write. But find the original screenplay. Read the original screenplay of Star Wars. It's so long. It's 3 movies. I mean, no one could turn in it. No one in Hollywood would ever turn in a script that's 235 pages long or whatever it was. They would throw it out as an amateur. If it's not a 120-page script or somewhere close around there, it's immediate indication this guy doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Find those scripts if you can. They're at the UCLA Motion Picture Library, and they are available. I've got scripts in this room that I picked up over the years. Some of them I purchased, and some of them I just have. There were some variation of script that they sent us at ILM because we were working on the movie, and they, it helps to understand where the thing is going. Like on the movie The Mask.
Yeah.
They almost never allow the crew to see the rest of the movie, the live action part of it. They just send us the effects sequences, and they don't really want us to see the script because Hollywood is such that we're working on a lot of movies. The last thing in the world you want is a director to say to another director at a cocktail party, "Oh, I saw all your stuff up at ILM." That's not good because the surprises are the life's blood of a movie or novel or anything else. And so that's why we were secretive. And so I got to take home a VHS of The Mask and look at it. And it starts with this pirate sequence where they take the mask and they bury it because it has caused them nothing but trouble. And then the movie goes on as it is now.
Yeah.
So we started working on the pirate sequence, and finally the director just cut the thing off. He just trimmed it off. We don't need that. And it was true. The movie worked without it. Oftentimes you write something and you realize that the real story that you're writing doesn't start until page 5. So you throw away the first 4 pages. And that's what happened with this movie.
Yeah.
Now, another one I saw all of was Cocoon. Ron Howard had a rough cut and he was showing it to his director, his producer, uh, and Richard and Lily Zanuck. Now, Richard's father was the famous Daryl Zanuck, and Richard had done so many films. Richard was the guy that when Steven Spielberg was having trouble on the set of the movie Jaws because the shark kept sinking, and word filtered back to Hollywood there were trouble on the set. Zanuck calls up the studio and talks to the producers at the studio, and he said, listen, if I see one studio jet touch down in Martha's Vineyard where they were shooting, I'm shutting the picture down. That's how you protect a director, because shutting a picture down is the worst possible thing a studio could have. Once that hits Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, it's a mark against the film. Something's wrong. Yeah. And that's what a great producer does for you. He protects the director. He keeps these people away from him so he can make his movie. Now, I also worked on Gangs of New York, and Martin Scorsese was the director. He did not have a producer powerful enough to keep people away from him. And he was talking to his editor. I heard him saying, you got to keep these people away from me. And, she didn't have that much power, brilliant editor. But so I appreciate the fact that there's a technique with working with studios. And there's certain things that are not obvious. In other words, there was a film I started working on to advising them about visual effects after I left ILM. And it was the director from Black Stallion. He was doing a movie, again, a kind of a kid's picture with a cougar and a small boy. Anyway, he made this brilliant little film. But when he got done, the studio said, oh, this is a direct-to-video tape. We'll open it in a theater for a couple of weeks and that's it. So he talked to his cinematographer, and the cinematographer said, you didn't spend enough money. You got to get them a little bit pregnant. You got to, don't bring it on budget or under budget, because if you had spent some money, they would have to support it and put it in theaters. He got rave reviews, but they just didn't. They just wanted their bucks back. Yeah. And so that's just a little industry quirk there. That if you're gonna try and make movies, you have to be aware of some of these things. Up is not always up in the movie business or entertainment in general. Yeah. And I've got some stories about that, and maybe how you can learn and protect yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very interesting side of it. I wanted to move away from Star Wars, but still stay in sci-fi with Star Trek 3, whether you had any particular memories of any particular challenges or any iconic shots that you're particularly proud to be involved with.
The only thing I can think about that is I had a chance to be in the movie. So Ken is out on the stage. I'm in my editing space. And he's asked me to be a stand-in while they block out the shot. And so it was inside the spaceship and the Enterprise. And it was, they needed a scene where there's two guards standing beside a door that is either an elevator door or I don't know what, but it's going to open and somebody's going to walk out and it's going to close. So they had hired an actor to play one of the guards. But Ken asked me to come over and be the stand-in. So I put on the suit and it fit perfect. for some odd reason. And I did the thing. And then I went back and went about my business. Well, the next day or two, whenever they decided to shoot it, the coordinator called and said, Ken wants you to do it. I mean, the suit fit perfect. We'll pay the actor, but why don't you come over and do that? Well, by this time, I was so busy with whatever I was doing under some kind of killer deadline, I couldn't do it. So that was my last chance at immortality or film immortality.
I mean, there's some very iconic shots in Star Trek 3, particularly the destruction of the Enterprise, which has never been done before. I mean, it's been done several times in later films, but that was quite a big deal to just almost destroy people's childhood in some respect. This iconic part of them. Did you feel that was a particular special sequence to do?
I have zero information on that one for some reason. The only the shot I remember is the one involving the Golden Gate Bridge and how difficult that was to get. In movies like this, scale is so important. And when you have a figure or a building, a structure that everyone recognizes, like the Statue of Liberty or the Golden Gate Bridge or something, and then you're trying to put a spaceship in there or a gorilla, with the Empire State Building or something, you have to really be aware of keeping the scale correct and believable. So oftentimes, in order to do this, like on Jedi, there's a scene where R2D2 and C3PO go up to the palace and knock on the door. And in order to have a wide shot where they look small and a close up where it's a real sized door and a real robots, you had to do a matte painting, etc. Anyway, the scale issue with the bridge and having it matted behind it. I really don't have a lot of information on that movie for whatever reason. I don't know.
Well, that's okay. I mean, we're talking about a much smaller budget for something, say like Star Trek 3 rather than Star Wars. Does that affect what you can do, how you can work if you're dealing with much more restricted resources, or doesn't it matter from your point of view?
Well, the shots are so expensive that we would often sit down with the director and his producer and advise that maybe you don't even need this shot. There's a way that we could make this work for you without that shot. Or if we add a shot, I mean, if a shot is, $250,000, dropping one shot is helpful to the effects budget, obviously. So I guess that was one of the specialties that we worked towards with clients, assuring them that we were here not to pad the budget, but to trim it if it was possible, and if they agreed that they could work without it. Now, this gets a little touchy sometimes, like when we did all of the shots for this movie Always, which had all these fantastic visual effects shots. They were really practical shots, but they were done in such a way that we made it exciting. We sent them down to the director and Steven Spielberg, and the editor, Spielberg's editor, cut them in, showed it to Spielberg, and said, "This doesn't work." And so, basically, my friend Mike Gleason and the director Joe Johnston of Always sat down, took the footage that we had sent them, our copy, and recut it and sent it back.
Hmm.
And Stephen looked at it and said, it's perfect. Okay, now you've got a really pissed off major film editor in Hollywood who is after you. And he was after Mike for quite a while. Then they became buddies.
Hmm.
But interfering with the director and his crew and the production, you're the visual effects shop. What the hell do you know?
Hmm.
Now, Spielberg had a lot of confidence in us. In fact, on the back of my book,
Yeah.
I have a quote from Spielberg,
Hmm.
which says, I always thought that if ILM had run the space agency, we'd have colonized Mars by now. And,
Yeah.
you know, so I asked my publisher if I could use that quote because I couldn't get a quote from George and I couldn't get a quote from, I didn't even try to get a quote from Spielberg. And George was not real happy with my book for some reason, which I'd never been able to figure out. Maybe too many inside stories.
Hmm.
I mean, I tried to explain that we're just guys working on a movie. We respect George. We are working our tail off to finish these movies and all. But this is a job to us. We're not Star Wars fans necessarily.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
appreciate it. But in fact, if you came in there and were trying to get a job and telling everybody what a great Star Wars fan, you wouldn't last 5 minutes because those are just the people you don't want. Now,
Yeah.
you can be a Star Wars fan and you can later reveal that, many have, but it's not an opening. We're looking for talent. And so I guess I told some tales in my book that he didn't particularly like to hear. And so that, that just is the way it goes. If you write about your family, somebody's going to not appreciate what you have to say, I guess.
Oh yeah. 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 Of course.
But I'm the only person from Lucasfilm that's ever written about it, and
hmm.
which is kind of surprising. I mean, there are books, picture books and stuff, but nobody has ever written about what it was like to work there, what was actually going
Hmm.
on.
Yeah.
And I think they're all afraid to.
Well,
Not
yeah.
that I'm not revealing any bad stuff about the company, but I am telling this is what it's like. This is what we were doing. This is we used to have a thing called a free speech board. Okay,
Hmm.
it was in the D hallway, it was just outside of our D screening room. And everyone would stop there after we had finished dailies, including George.
Hmm.
And we would, it was free speech board because anybody could put up anything they wanted.
Yeah.
And so like there was a drawing of what Muhammad Ali was going to look like when he was in his 70s, and he was like 30 or something. And there was an article saying that a house in the future could cost as much as $200,000. And we thought, well, that's impossible. How could a house cost $200,000? I mean, you'd have to make $100,000 a year in income, and that's not going to happen, and or there'd be all kinds of funny, weird stuff. And I used to save all the stuff in boxes. I had years worth of it because the guy before me also saved all this stuff.
Hmm.
And I'm sure it's all been thrown out, but it would be interesting to see something.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of those things in my book. So
Hmm. Yeah, it does sound very, very interesting. There's another big film franchise I wanted to mention, Back to the Future.
yes. So I worked on all three of the Back to the Future movies, and I I've always thought that those scripts were just brilliant. because I've written a couple of scripts. My wife has written a couple of scripts, and to keep that many balls in the air as far as the time frame, where you are you in the past, are you in the future, what about the present? Then you've got all these characters and their parents and them visiting. I mean, it's really hard to write something that
Hmm.
I have to take a break here and refill my water. So.
Oh, yeah.
So on Back to the Future, there was the one that goes into the past, where we have the chase with the miniature railroad car. So some of the car, some of the train and the set of the western town was up in the Sierra, around Jamestown on Highway 49, because they had a real live steam engine there that we could model and co-opt for our own uses.
Yeah.
But we also had this model.
Right. Yeah.
It's on the back of my book. And that miniature was the one that we ran off a train trestle. So Ken was looking for a place to build the train trestle and run it off. And I went to him and I said, you know, when I was a kid, I grew up in Marin, studios in Marin. I said, when I was a kid, one of my relatives had a job working in a quarry, an old quarry, up in the hills of Novato. And Ken lived in Novato, and he used to like to ride horses with his wife. And so I told him about this old quarry. And so one weekend he rode up there with his wife and came back and said, well, this is perfect because it's got a giant pit where they had taken out a lot of stone to make it for the quarry, make gravel. And so they built that trestle, I guess you'd call it, and the partially dismantled bridge. And they brought the model that I just showed you in the back of the book, on the back of my book. And they ran that off and shot it in slow motion with a bunch of high-speed cameras of it going down and crashing into this little canyon.
Yeah.
Well, the canyon was just about the right size to match the scale. So when you see the scale of the bridge and the locomotive, you have no point of reference other than that. So the canyon looks correct in size. It looks giant compared to the size of the trestle and the steam engine. So again, this is why scale is so important. Well, anyway, I've seen the great Buster Keaton film, The General, where he has a real steam engine, full size, crash down in his movie. And guess what? It doesn't explode in fire and flame.
Yeah.
But in movies, you got to have some explosions in fire and flame when you crash a steam engine down into a canyon. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
So that's part of movie logic, what I call movie logic. In other words, if the girl is running away from the monster, she has to fall and she has to scream. Guys don't fall and scream, but girls do.
Yeah.
And I was outside a theater where a new film was run, and two Hollywood types came out, and one said to the other after seeing it, "What'd you think?" And the other guy said, "No guns," which in Hollywood parlance means it's not going to make it. It's a failure.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any guns in it.
Yeah.
And if you look at movie posters, it's hard to find one that doesn't have a gun in it somewhere.
Yeah.
That's movie logic.
Yeah.
And there's lots of instances of movie logic that you can or cannot break, depending on how clever you are as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
So the other parts of Back to the Future were just dealing with the DeLorean, dealing with. I remember Ken went out to this parking lot and started sending back this footage of tire tracks, or what appeared to be tire tracks, which were actually two strips of flames. And I was wondering what is that all about? Because I didn't know what the scene he was imagining was going to be, where the car takes off that fast, and then the lightning being used to energize the car. I mean, those lightning bolts were all done by hand animation in those days. And to a certain extent, that's how visual effects were created. There was a great sense of hands-on, the artist's hand. And when I made a little documentary on the making of Jurassic Park, I interviewed this woman who was going to be painting the scale of the outside of the dinosaur, digitally painted. And so she told me that at first they thought they would do this, what they call procedurally. In other words, they would do a little bit of digital artwork, and then they would have the computer replicate that for the whole skin of the dinosaur. Well, it turns out it didn't look right. And we had taken a lot of photographs of contemporary beasts like elephants, and we'd marked them with numbers and grids and photographed them slow motion, fast motion. And we had photographed them for their texture of their skin and all, because as Phil Tippett, who was the genius behind Jurassic Park, said, the greatest model that we have are living creatures that are on Earth now to tell us what they might have looked like. Of course, we have skeletons, but to get the skin and how it would fold and all. So anyway, this artist lady said they tried to do it procedurally and it didn't look right because it didn't have the hand of an artist who could make it look not all the same. The surface had to have a the essence of nature, like a plant or any living thing. It's not perfect. It has all these dips and shadows and changes in the texture. If you look, I guess, at the hide of a rhinoceros or something, it has a natural blend to it, a look to it. And this is what I tell young people that are trying to work in effects, or even it all comes back to the tricks that artists use. If you paint a picture of a car, how do you give it weight? How do you make it look like it's not floating? This is what happens when you have digital. I remember going into a session with Dennis Murin, and he had created all these small dinosaurs running, and they all looked like they were bouncing, like they had no weight. But if you go back to the car, it's something that the artist does to the tires. There's a kind of a squish to them, and with shadows that tell your brain, oh, not even consciously, it's heavy, it's weight, it's pushing down on the earth. And you have to do that with the running creatures. You have to add dust. You have to add, in Jurassic, they shot water elements. So when the dinosaur, uh, his foot hit the ground in that rain sequence, there was a
Mm.
splash.
Yeah.
These are things to tie it into the real world, to make it look like it has weight and texture, to make it look like it's dripping wet. I mean, this is a piece of this is these are ones and zeros. This is a piece of uh, software.
Yeah.
But if you have the artist skilled in creating a shadow and making a tree look like it's attached to the ground,
Mm.
etc. These are not new things. You know, they were doing this in the Renaissance,
Mm.
and you have to have people that have an understanding of that. Phil Tippett knew about animal motion. He
Mm.
knew about uh, how an animal that's on the hunt focuses. His eyes are focused on the creature he's attacking. His there's a look to his head and how he lowers it. And we studied slow motion images of lions and leopards attacking gazelle and attacking elephants to bring that sense of urgency and drama
Mm.
into the images in Jurassic. And it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, is there
Looked
anything?
great.
Yeah. Yeah. As you say, you have that mass and that reality that your brain knows if you're being tricked. So it's all about the final touches, isn't it? Is there any final comments about Back to the Future you'd like to make before we move on to something else?
Uh, let's move on. I
Yeah,
don't have a lot to say about that for some reason. Probably tomorrow I'll think of something.
yeah. Well, we had an audience question who said that Mars Attacks is one of their favourite films. Do you recall much from Mars Attacks?
Um, so that was a Tim Burton film, a really strange approach. Um, it had, I think that's a film that we're going to look at again. I think it's going to hold up. I'm not sure it was. I'm not sure it was as successful as he had hoped.
Hmm.
Um, it reminds me a little bit of some of the Howard the Duck movie where um, that just got a bad rap. The work in it, a lot of it was brilliant. Um, the I remember uh, Tim Burton came to us and he showed us his student animated films uh, to sort of try and make a connection between who he was and who we were. We're a group of technical people, and he was trying to let us get inside of his head in a way, as how he approached things
Hmm.
creatively. And I guess the other thing, this whole strange world. Let me shut this off. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Um, I think that 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 effort on his part to go into now, you got to realize that most of these directors have not dealt with effects before. I used to say it's sometimes like giving a director the keys to a Ferrari,
Hmm.
uh, and he might not know how to drive that Ferrari, and
Hmm.
we're the Ferrari, and you
Yeah.
want to make sure that he doesn't run off the road. I read a book recently about Elon Musk, the
Hmm.
guy from Tesla. So after he became really successful, he bought a new car that was very, very uh, scarce. They only made a few of them. Cost him $1 million. He had it delivered in a truck. He went to a buddy and they hopped in and said, let's take it for a drive. He took it out on a road and he said, watch this. And he he hit the pedal and the thing just went totally out of control and smashed into a bank. He couldn't handle it. And he said, well, that was fun. Lucky I can afford it. Because he basically destroyed the car. And the we would sort of assess who we were working with. And unfortunately, Burton had a lot of experience with animation and his own particular brand of kind of special effects directing in live action, if you can understand that.
Yeah.
So he was a good collaborator. That's mostly what I remember about working with him. And then in my book, there's a great shot of he had this prop in his movie, which was this giant ray beam thing, and we all got to sit under the ray beam and have our photo taken. And it looks like I'm having a brain implant or something. It was a fun film to work with.
Yeah, it's certainly. I haven't seen it for many years, but
I haven't either. Some of these
well,
things I never see. I understand Woody Allen never looks at his movies after that.
I mean, do you find it difficult to watch a film that, well, either you've worked on or a visual effects film and not take it apart and think, well, I would like to change this, or they should have done that a bit?
Well,
to divorce yourself?
I take the attitude that Francis Coppola once said. He said, when I sit down to watch a movie, I think to myself, oh boy, this is going to be great. I get to see a movie. I'm so excited. This is going to be wonderful. He's like, I'm not there to be hypercritical.
No.
It may lose me after 10 minutes or something, but you approach it with an open mind. And I know how hard it is to make a movie because of my career and because I've made movies myself. It's very difficult. And a couple of times when I was working at ILM, some people would come to me and see if I could help them. And I'm totally open to that because, again, I know how hard it is to do this stuff. I mean, it's almost impossible. In one way, it is like the last thing in the universe that you can do, having no official training, having no backing, having no history. You can go out and you can make a movie. Now it's expensive and it's difficult, but you can do it. And you can take that movie once you've made it somewhere and you can show it to people. And it's possible that it will be accepted. There's many famous examples of people who came from nowhere and were able to get this thing distributed. And there's not many of those things left. I suppose you could say people who write software that have no training could possibly create something. But as I understand it, young people today, they want to get involved with something that makes a difference. They don't want to work on just anything because they have a high tech skills. If they have the possibility of working something that really is going to have an impact, either because they have a passion for something, the environment or whatever it is, so you could say that's an exception. There maybe things that you could do there, and you can write a book. As George said, pencils, paper are cheap, but not many people do it because it takes courage. And
Yeah.
that's what it takes to make a movie. It takes courage. You really have to be crazy to try and do something like this. But it is doable. You can do it. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother took me to a film set being shot in Marin County, where I lived at the time, and it was a movie called Blood Alley. So there was a place in Marin called China Camp, where a lot of Chinese shrimpers lived and fished in the bay. And this camp still existed, and it wasn't too hard for the prop department to come out there and make it look as if it was a village in China where the scene in the movie took place.
Mm.
It was John Wayne and I forget, Lauren Bacall. So anyway, we're walking into this set, and at one side to the entrance, there's a large stack of boulders. So I'm walking along, I'm about 6 years old maybe, and I happen to brush my shoulder against the boulders, and they move.
Hmm.
I thought, what the hell? They moved. How did they move? Oh, they're fake.
Hmm.
They're fake boulders. There are guys who work in the motion picture business, and they fake stuff, and they build stuff, and they make movies.
Hmm.
And that got in my brain. And that location is about 1 mile for where ILM was, where I later worked. So you got to get something like that in your brain that makes you think, well, it's possible. I saw it. I also, I live with my great aunt because my parents died when I was fairly early. And she had a neighbor, and her neighbor name was Mrs. Hickman. And my aunt was always sending her stuff, like leftover vegetables or soup or something. And when I went into her home, the television was always running full blast 24/7, was never shut off. Now, this is the early days of television. They didn't have TV guides and stuff. So I went back to my aunt and I said, what's going on over there with Mrs. Hickman? And she said, oh, you're too young to realize who she is. That's Bessie Barriscale. And she was a silent screen star for about 10 years in Hollywood. And her husband was a film director. And she was good friends with Mary Pickford. And the reason she has her television on is they used, I found out this later, in the early days, instead of putting up a test screen, they would just run old films, silent films, any kind of films. They got them really cheap.
Hmm.
They had a film chain at the studio and they would just run them, but they weren't listed. And her old films would be run, and all of her buddies and her husbands and Mary Pickford's. And she had a 10 years worth of movies that she had made. At one time, she was the top screen star in the country. And so that's why she was running these things, because there were no film groups, there was no DVD or videos or anything. And when I got to film school, I looked her up and verified all of this. She was this person, and you can look her up on the internet now. There's even more about her than there was then. Someone just sent me a beautiful photo of her, when she was, a young woman. And I wish I had it when I wrote my book, because I put a picture in there. It was not as good as this one. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that if you have no experience at all, you would never possibly think that you could be involved in motion pictures. No one in my family was in motion pictures. My aunt dated a guy who wrote the original magazine article for High Noon, which is one of my favorite movies, along with Bill Clinton. It's his favorite movie too. He ran it 11 times in the White House. So anyway, that's just those two events were kind of something that when I got to thinking about could I do this? Could I make movies? Could I, you're young enough to where you think, well, I can give it a shot. And, but it helps to have something in your memory bank
Hmm.
that keeps you thinking, oh, it's not so crazy. Who knows? And it
Yeah.
was the 70s. Young people were making movies,
Hmm.
getting them shown.
Would you say that's one of the disadvantages nowadays, that it's more difficult to get into the industry? I mean, I assume you wouldn't be able to get into ILM the way you did back then. So is it advantages, disadvantages to, where we are now as opposed to then?
I tell people, I tell young people, if you really want to be in the movie business,
Hmm.
you can be in the movie
You
business.
get that.
I mean, you're going to have to move to Los Angeles and you're going to have to make bologna sandwiches and
Hmm.
have some kind of opposite job and try and sell your screenplay or whatever it is that you're doing. But you might not like it. And I know I have a friend, Sidney Walensky. He became a top editor. I knew him in film school. And he came through ILM with a project one time when he was the editor, feature live action editor.
Hmm.
He did most of the editing on The Sopranos television show. That's one of the reasons why it was so good.
Hmm.
And I went down to visit him one time, and he said, I'm doing all these movies, and I'm, and you make good money, but you never know if you're going to work next month. I mean, if you try and go on vacation and turn down a job, they may never call you again. So there's a part of the uncertainty that doesn't work for everybody. I
Hmm.
mean, when you're young and you're not married, you don't have children, you can do anything you want.
Yeah.
But it gets old after a while. We used to work at ILM 7 days a week sometimes as the deadlines
Hmm.
got near. And I never saw a store open. I was looking in the windows, looking, and they were 10-hour days, 6 and 7 day weeks. And after years of that, that gets a little
Hmm.
tiresome,
Yeah.
especially when you start to have a real life and you've, done adult things like buying houses and having a
Hmm.
family. Um, I also think that there's a lot more opportunity now because Hollywood has been invaded by major major players with big bucks like Netflix and Amazon.
Hmm.
They're able to pour billions of dollars in. The studios don't have that kind of capital.
No.
So there's a lot more work for actors and everybody. There's a lot more of it. Whether it's you can't go in with no resume, and in the sense that you've worked on this, you've worked on that, or you can go in if you're a visual effects. I mean, if you're a computer graphics person
Hmm.
with a resume. I mean, it's the same way that you can go into Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
So there are, because of the advancements in technology, I talked to a camera operator once
Hmm.
and I asked him about, we were on a shoot. After I worked at ILM, I went out and did a bunch of things out of the Union Hall because I want to see what it was like to work that way. I'd never worked that way before.
Yeah.
I was pretty much a permanent employee at ILM, although, I had to work on pictures. That's paid my salary was working on pictures, billing my time to pictures that came through.
Hmm.
So I'm talking to this guy who was a camera operator. And I said, well, what's it like to come into the set? You're an outsider and these guys have all worked. He said, oh, they love me because with these new digital cameras, they have so many files and sub files and subdirectories. And I know it all. I can go down in this camera and I can go all the way to the bottom and fix their problems, whatever it is.
Hmm.
So a technology advantage will get you a long way, even amongst a bunch of old timers who are
Hmm.
used to everybody working their way up through the guild system and all.
Hmm.
You're going to find resistance, but that's a given.
Yeah.
And you need to um, you need to have your own project.
Hmm.
You need to have something that's yours. In other words, if you if you go down to Hollywood and you have a script that you've written, you have something.
Hmm.
You go to a talent agency and you go down to try and find some guy in the mailroom who wants to be an agent. He doesn't have any script. He doesn't know anybody has a script,
Hmm.
but you have one.
Yeah.
That's a calling card. I went down with a movie. They couldn't afford to not look at the movie. It might be something, it might be trash, but it still might be, it still might work,
Hmm.
you know. So I think that's important that you have something of your own. You're not just looking for a job. You are
Hmm.
looking for a job, but you also have some bona fides yourself. You've written something, or you have made a film, or you've worked on a film, or something. And there are opportunities there. I mean, one thing this I recently read that I had never thought of before. When I was first in college, I did a lot of writing, and some of it was pretty good. And I got good grades, and professors would read it in front of the um, in front of the. I'm worried that my computer's not plugged in. I think it is. Uh, but what he said was, you need to take these. Um, you need to take your writing to the student newspaper. I didn't know we had a student newspaper, and they're looking for stuff and get it published. I wish I'd known that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so what I was saying was
Hmm.
that uh, the people you're going to be dealing with in Hollywood, they refer to everybody who's not a deal maker as talent.
Hmm. Yeah.
And as a writer or a film director or a an editor, uh, maybe not a cinematographer. Those are trades.
Hmm.
But when my boss, Ken Rawson, uh, was hired at Sony Studios after leaving ILM,
Hmm.
I heard that the head of the studio was talking to whoever was going to, fill out his paycheck and get him a Porsche or whatever, whatever you get with those high-level multi-million dollar
Hmm.
jobs. He said talent loves him. That
Hmm.
was his description of my boss Ken, who's some kind of visual effects genius. Talent loves him,
Yeah.
and so when you're going down there as a writer, guess what? You're talent, and they are not. They don't have. They don't have the ability to write scripts or to film and make movies. All this stuff. That's not what they have, but that's
Yeah.
what you have
Hmm.
potential.
Yeah.
So there's an advantage there,
Hmm.
even for a nobody. Uh, you're bringing something, and that's why you need to have something. I think Just bring your writing. If it's been published somewhere, even on a student newspaper, bring your writing. You've got a calling card there. This all depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to be a film director,
Hmm.
or maybe you're just trying to get a job in the movie business somewhere where you can work and be part of the system. That's also, but you don't know till you try. And the other thing I try and tell young people is go for an internship. I submitted my Jack Johnson film to the AFI to try and get into the AFI, and they said, well, why don't you go into our internship program?
Hmm.
And so they sent me to a director, Richard Fleischer, whose father had been an animator, extremely successful, and invented the Betty Boop series and the Out of an Inkwell series. So uh, Fleischer was a trusted um, motion picture director,
Hmm.
and oftentimes he would be called in to a film that was in trouble, and they would replace the director with Richard Fleischer. So anyway, I got to go into the studio dining room and have lunch with Richard Fleischer. And while I'm sitting there, these people are coming up, all kinds of heads of departments and stuff, and asking Richard, when do you think the film is going to start? Because they don't work until he works. And he's
Hmm.
saying, oh, yeah, it's coming. So he was going to have me as his intern. He said, you can go from day one to the premiere. I don't care. You can be there the whole time. And I thought, wow, this is great.
Hmm.
And then he said, how do you plan to support yourself during this time?
Hmm.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I hadn't thought of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
And when I think back on what I should have said
Hmm.
when I was flying home, when I got to the airport, I sent him a telegram that said, I'm all in. I'll do anything to make this work.
Hmm.
And I called AFI, and they said he chose somebody else.
Yeah.
So an internship is a great opportunity to get in and see what it's actually like.
Hmm.
Because if you intern with an attorney, one of the professions that is most disliked by attorneys themselves, let's say, figure out what their job is, which is preparing for trials that never happen and always settle.
Hmm.
Uh, you will get, we had an internship program at ILM, and
Hmm.
we got some of the best and the brightest young people that you would ever meet in your life.
Hmm.
And they got a chance to see exactly what it was like to do what we did.
Hmm.
And there would be no negatives when they left the internship program and decided not to seek work in that field. It wasn't like somebody hired you and you then decided to quit and go off and do something else.
Hmm.
It was a perfect window to see that this is crazy. I don't want to do this. I'll try another internship or something. So that's available. Now, usually, those all came to us from colleges,
Hmm.
film schools, and but it didn't necessarily have to have a film program to
Hmm.
get into
Yeah.
applying for it. You had to have some recommendations and stuff.
Hmm.
We had a guy, John Knoll, who came in on that program. And John Knoll, he was like emptying the trash and he was doing whatever had to be done.
Hmm.
But he was a really bright young man.
Hmm.
And we slowly began to realize just how bright John was. And every time we thought we knew, he did something even more spectacular.
Hmm.
And finally, we didn't know this, but he had been working at home on a program called Photoshop.
Yes.
John invented with his brother Photoshop. Now,
Right.
Photoshop is probably one of the best-selling programs that's ever been invented. I don't know what would be bigger than Photoshop.
Hmm.
And then we started including it into the work that we did, some of the techniques, and he had learned a lot from us about what is needed in one of these type programs, visual
Hmm.
programs. And so after all this happened, and John would bring in stuff that he did last night from his on his computer at home and said, look at this. It would be a whole visualization of sequence of storyboards that could be shown to the client. And I was just like, and I said, we should be doing more of that. And they said, yeah, but only John knows how to do that stuff. So anyway, then we used to joke, John has an older, smarter brother, and he lives back in Michigan. And when John gets stuck on something, with if you can believe that, he calls Tom, and Tom helps him out. And he wrote the thing together. And if you open up Photoshop today, the first name is Tom.
Right.
Thomas Noel. So the different inroads, that was an internship. Somebody recommended him because he was going to USC. I guess he was in the film program, and some professor put his name in the hat, and he started working doing menial tasks. Then he was back in the math department, and then he was sitting out on the couch at front, and they were like looking for some place for him to do because the job had run out. But they spotted talent, and that gets you a long way.
I mean, would you say that obviously ILM's come a huge way since the late 70s, 80s? There's hardly a film that you don't see the ILM on the credits. Has it got, in terms of its evolution, is it now a better company, or is something lost when you grow that large to accommodate the demand, or does it still have its internships? It's still the same ILM that you.
I don't think so. But we're dinosaurs, The thing that I notice is, like with the Star Wars films, they seem to be Star Wars films about Star Wars films instead of something new. George would never put out a Star Wars film with a lot of new stuff in it, a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't see that. And one of the last ones I saw, the actress, she was in the same dress in the entire movie. I mean, what? In Jedi, he had her in a skimpy bikini costume, amongst other costumes. So that's one criticism I have.
Yeah.
And the quality of the work, if you don't get CG right, it looks funny.
Yeah.
And so I have some reservations there, but they still do fantastic work, or they wouldn't be doing things. The last time I talked to a person that worked there, they said that it's mostly just supervisors that work there anymore. All the actual workers are in, China or somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know the extent to that, but and that caused some communication problems, at least in the early days, in how to do this work. One thing that we did, which I thought was important, it's the old thing about meeting people around the coffee bar at work. You run into people that you don't normally ever talk to, or didn't even know they worked in the company, and they start telling you stuff about what they're doing in the math department, and you're like, well, I could use that. I mean, do you have a lens that will actually do that I could borrow? And it's the same thing with dailies. Everybody that was working on the film went to dailies after they'd had their coffee, and we were all together in a room, and we saw what everyone else was doing. And there was, not only was there a camaraderie to this, there was also subtle transmissions of information that weren't there at other times, that everybody was just all working on their own little thing, and they never talked to anybody. And so how that works with people dealing on the telephone or Zoom from China, I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like a different dynamic and with positives and negatives, I suppose. I
There
want
are technical ways around it. On Jurassic Park,
hmm,
Spielberg was finishing up Schindler's List.
yeah,
I think it was Schindler, yeah. And we had developed something like Zoom, like what we're doing now,
hmm,
but it was um, uh, encrypted because we were running scenes from the dinosaurs that we didn't want anyone to see.
yeah,
And it had a pointer where Stephen could point things out or we could point things out to Stephen. There was an interactive aspect to it that earlier systems did not have.
hmm,
And the other thing we did is when we opened up the video, um, everybody saw everyone else on their team. We saw everyone sitting there around Stephen, all his people, his editor, and everything. And he could see all of our people. And so, all right, so that was the introduction to here we are all, and we're going to start talking about stuff. And then we would shrink down to what we have right now, except there would be a screen that had the shots, and all the shots had numbers.
hmm,
Every frame was numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 500 or whatever it was. Now, when digital first came out, I came up with that. We were looking at these shots, and I said, you got to have frame numbers
hmm,
because you want to talk about uh, frame 57 or SB19 or whatever it is. And Steven wants, or whoever the director is, wants to be able to refer to, and the animators want to be able to refer to uh, the dinosaur at this point in his stride. Could you change that? It's too fast, it's too slow, whatever it is. Now, when you have something sophisticated like that has been thought through, the earlier ones didn't have that, and the directors didn't like them at all. But when they saw what we were doing, then it became acceptable to them
hmm,
because they could actually they could run it back and forth. They could stop it. They had controls, and it made it work in a way. So maybe they're doing that with China, and that could open a lot of avenues.
oh yeah, yeah. I wanted to touch very briefly on the Abyss and working with James Cameron because he's somebody much like George Lucas, very very visual, very much into the technology. Was he quite not say demanding, but very had a very clear
No,
vision.
no, you can say demanding
Demanding,
because he's very demanding.
yeah,
And if you sign on with that guy, you better buckle up because you're going to get a ride of your
yeah, right,
life. And now we were not that, or at least I wasn't that involved with him as a director, in everybody's face every day and having all the demands. But we were doing some groundbreaking stuff, and one of those things was the water creature. And
mm,
that was all John Knoll. He figured out how to do that. And then um, a touching and the finger going into the water creature, and then it all crashing down at a given point. It's all becomes disassembled in water. And the wave that is threatening the Golden Gate Bridge. A lot of this had to do with the advances in the technology of what CG was capable of doing, capable of rendering.
mm,
And in those early days, what we were doing was we were we were taking a film, a motion picture film, and we were scanning it into a digital image, and we were putting that into a computer.
mm,
And once you have a way to go into a computer with an image and then back out to film to cut into the movie. Then when it's in that computer, you can do any damn thing you want to it. I mean,
mm,
you have real freedom.
yeah,
The render times in those days were, 24 hours to do a short shot.
mm,
Of course,
Yeah.
all that has changed. Storage has changed. Um, so I think the biggest breakthrough in the technology was being able to scan an image into a computer and then back out onto film. And that's how it was done originally. In other words, you didn't have digital motion pictures that you could work with and manipulate and then just put back into your Avid movie that's all digital anyway. But that was the big thing that we were able to accomplish, this the scanning in and out, because that was breakthrough. You could do anything you wanted. That you had a full map.
I mean, the last film I wanted to mention with you, Bill, is again one of my favourites, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I just wondered if there's any sort of if that was fun to do.
That was my favorite movie to work on. It was a 2-year project.
Yeah.
Disney had signed up for a $50 million movie, which back then was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it starred a cartoon character that nobody had ever heard of because he didn't exist, Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
So that was a big jumping off point. And it was also a film that married classic full animation with live action creatures.
Yeah.
Actors.
Yeah.
And mixing those two had never been done before. With I got to take a break.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
I've got a cold and it's okay. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to last, but let me see if I can tell one story.
Yeah.
So we had to prove that this could be done. Live action had been mixed with animation before, but they were locked off cameras and they were kind of repetitive dance numbers that you could add animation characters to and match this repetitive acting, dancing movement. And what this movie was proposing was a moving camera.
Yeah.
And having characters move through situations where the light was moving and there were reflections and there were mirrors and there were headlights. So we cooked up a scene as a test and we shot it on the main stage. We had the car from the movie and we had I can't remember if we didn't have a Hoskins, but we had somebody playing Hoskins.
Yeah.
And we shot it. And it was supposedly in an alley. It was dark, but there was a light hanging from the ceiling, a light bulb, and it was swinging. And so it was throwing light and shadow all over the place. And there was a mirror. And the characters, Roger and Jessica had to move through this live action scene with all this going on. So we shot it, we sent it off to Florida where the animators had to do all this work, and they sent it back, and we married the negative with the animation on an optical printer. I cut a reel with a soundtrack that had been pre-recorded, and I put it with that, and we sent it down to Spielberg and the director so that they could see if they thought it worked. And they went nuts. It looked perfect. It was funny, and it was just absolutely it proves that it could be done.
Yeah.
And so this was a 2-year project. It had never been done before. When we got the movie done, we took it to Pasadena and screened it for all kinds of audiences, different age groups. The one I went to, the movie famously starts with this really hilarious cartoon of Roger Rabbit and Baby Herman. And this was to introduce the concept to the audience of the animators moving into a live action world and vice versa. So the cartoon runs, and I think it's still one of the funniest, most original cartoons that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's done in the old Disney traditional cell painted animation. That's the last of that breed.
Yes.
And they've never made another one, which they could easily. If they could get Spielberg to agree to it, which he won't, evidently.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of the first audience got up and walked out because they didn't want to, they were young people and they didn't want to see a cartoon or a cartoon movie. But then there was another audience and they stayed. But one guy got up and said, you know, I like your movie, but I'd never bring my children to it because of the bad language of Baby Herman. I thought the Disney execs would fall over dead because for someone to say they would not bring children to a movie like this was the death knell. But I'll give them credit. They never changed a damn thing as far as I can see. And the lines were, pretty mild. It was a little shocking, perhaps, having a baby smoking a cigar, making lurid comments about a woman.
Yeah.
But when that scene of the cartoon, which opens the movies, when that's done and Roger is the director who's live action, and that's Joel Silver is the director. I have to explain that Joel Silver made such an enemy of the head of Disney that they absolutely hated each other. And the director of Roger Rabbit thought it would be funny to put Joel Silver in the opening of the movie.
Yeah.
Because they hated each other. And Joel does a great act of being the director and slamming the script down on the ground and arguing with Roger. So when they come to, like I said, the idea was to show the characters moving into the real world and vice versa. So when it comes to the showing the movie to the head of the studio, when Bob Zemeckis has to show it to, God, who was the head then? I've forgotten. Eisner. So the movie opens and Eisner is sitting there beside the director. And Eisner says, that looks like a lot like Joel Silver. And Bob Zemeckis says, he is, isn't he great? And there's a pause, and Eisner said, he is pretty good. So I guess that was, I don't know if that was the end of the feud, but it was pretty ballsy to put this guy in a movie that was really designed to save the studio. Disney was not doing. And this was a huge hit for them. It put them back on the map.
Yeah.
And we opened it in Radio City Music Hall. And as I was walking down the street coming to the little get together where it had the directors and the writers and studio people, I stopped in a newsstand and I saw Roger all over the front of Newsweek and the New York Times and everything. So I grabbed one and I took it down to this dinner we were about to have. And I said, look, fellas, you know, our movie's on the front of the Newsweek. And they just pounced on me and grabbed the thing. Why didn't you get more copies and all this stuff? And I said, look, don't you have a publicity department? I'm just the visual effects editor. But anyway, they started reading the reviews aloud to the table, and they were just raved. So it was all forgotten about quickly.
Yeah.
And then we went to see the movie, and the rest is history. It just lit up, and it still holds up today. It's so full of humor at both an adult and just sort of a child's slapstick back and forth stuff that I'm quite proud of that movie. It was just so unique, and it was. I mean, I sat down at the chem with Bob Zemeckis when he was up at ILM, and we were looking at it, or I was threading up the chem and showing him something, and I said, I just love that scene in the old animation where the character is running by the same telephone pole again and again. It's like the telephone pole is on a sheet of paper that's in a loop, and it's running by, and Bob says, oh, we're going to do all of that. He was like a little kid. He was excited about, he'd been fired off of he'd been fired off of the picture. He'd been fired off of Cocoon. He was supposed to direct Cocoon after Romancing the Stone. Romancing the Stone was one of those movies where word leaked out that it wasn't any good.
Yeah.
But then when they released it, it became a smash hit. And that's how important it is to keep your hat over scuttlebutt about your movie and don't show it to anybody, because if it leaks out, you're done. So he was supposed to do Cocoon with Lily and Richard Zanuck, and they fired him and got somebody else, or got Ron Howard. But then after he did the Back to the Future series, he could do anything he wanted, and he wanted to do Roger Rabbit. And that's how it works. You're up, you're down. That's Hollywood.
Yes. Well, the final question I've got for you, Bill, is just one from my audience. I just wanted to know what was the most difficult either sequence to work on in your career or film.
Well, as I've explained, SB19, that was a pretty tough shot to make work.
Yeah.
Even though it all been figured out by geniuses, not me.
So nothing kind of really sort of.
Just because they shot a shot for a given sequence doesn't mean it. I would borrow shots from other sequences. I would borrow spaceships from other shots to use in the shot I was working on if what I had been shot for that wasn't working. And sometimes I'd turn them upside down. I would flop them to get them to, if they were shot this way, I could flop it and they would shoot that way. And if you look at the crossover sheet for SB19, that's what I would sometimes do. It's like whatever works. George Lucas was sitting in the front of the chem one day, and we're all sort of standing around there, and he was running a sequence from, I think it was from Jedi, and somebody said, "Oh, that shot crossed the line." Now, crossing the line means that if you have a cowboy on the left and a cowboy on the right, one's in a black hat, one's in a white hat, good guy, bad guy, you don't want to use a cut that is confusing as to where they're standing. And it's called crossing the line as far as editing. Somebody said to George, "That shot crossed the line." And he said, "That's film school stuff. We're making a movie here." Meaning you can get away with whatever you can get away with. We're beyond rules. We are making a movie, and we're going to flop the shot left, right. We're going to send it to optical and do a close-up on it, whatever you can do. So to answer the question about the difficult shots are the ones that you can't make work, and you have to do a bunch of workarounds to somehow fix them, because it has to integrate seamlessly, hopefully, into a sequence. You're delivering stuff to a cutting room that is trying to make a successful bit to the movie. Like there's a story I tell about Marsha Lucas. Marsha Lucas was George Lucas's wife back in those days, and she was a really fantastic editor. She had cut Taxi Driver, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. She'd worked for Scorsese, but she was also a person who could look at your movie and not only tell you what was wrong with it, but how to fix it. Now, where do you go to get that kind of advice? Nowhere. So when she first saw Steven Spielberg's Raiders, she said, "Steven, there's no emotional resolution. What happened to the girl?" He had just dropped that connection with the girl, and he had Indy walking off into the sunset or whatever he was doing.
Yeah.
And he realized, yeah. So they went to San Francisco. They used the steps of City Hall. They got the actors back together. They had them do a final scene where it's revealed, they're still friends or whatever it was. I don't remember. And they cut it in the movie, and the rest is history. So on Jedi, she came in for 2 weeks. We didn't know that they were going to get a divorce, that the marriage was over. But she had agreed to come in and do her thing. And when she did her thing, she shortened up stuff. She made shots out of scraps. She made there's a sequence where Leia is talking to an Ewok on a redwood log that's laying on the ground.
Yeah.
I had a friend who worked in the cutting room, and he said that was nothing. There was nothing there. She pulled scraps out of the trim bit and made that scene and made it a little emotional spot in an otherwise dull sequence.
Yeah.
And I've gone back and looked at it because I wrote this in a blog, and somebody said, "Oh no, that was all scripted and everything." And I said, "Well, if you look at it, you'll see there's only one line of dialogue that's used, and the rest is made up by Ben Burt switching words around and her editing this thing." So we were all kind of missing her when it was announced that she was going to no longer be part of the program. And when I see a movie or someone says they saw a movie and it was with their favorite director, and this one just wasn't, they didn't like or whatever, I always think to myself, is he working with new people?
Mm.
Or is he working with the same people he works with all the time?
Yeah.
And often it's not. He couldn't get the screenwriter that he usually works with, or the editor, or cinematographer, or whatever. They just weren't available.
Mm.
And sometimes I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's that um, group. No one person makes a movie. I don't care what a director says. They say, "Oh, I'm cutting my latest movie." No, he's not cutting. He's sitting next to the editor who's cutting it. Usually,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if I answered that. Except SB19 was a tough shot, and any of the ones that you have to sort of scrape together, like she did on that shot with the Ewok.
Yeah.
Those are ones, but forces you to be creative too. I mean, sometimes uh, you get desperate, then you come up with ideas that
Mm.
you wouldn't have. That's why when you see a finished movie, um, a lot of stuff happened from the screenplay to that. Sometimes they just threw the screenplay out.
Mm.
Um, there's a book by about the making of the Annie Hall, eh, by the film editor.
Mm.
The movie was not even about Annie Hall. It wasn't called Annie Hall. Uh, as they were editing it, he would send Woody Allen out into the hallway to start making up lines that they could use to cover rough spots. And fortunately, Allen is brilliant at that. And the stuff he brought back pulled the whole movie in a different direction. That's the process. It is a combination of talented people adding and trying to come up with a consistent
Mm.
whole.
Yeah. Mm.
It's not a novelist sitting down and writing his novel.
Mm.
It's a group effort.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly you worked on some wonderful films that had, as you say, it's such phenomenal talent on Star Wars, so Back to the Future, People in Roger Rabbit. So yeah, it's because of that collaborative effort that they hold up so well today. I think. Um,
That's why George had us working on other movies
hmm,
between his movies.
yeah.
So he could be out thinking up movies, but he could keep this group that he worked with together,
Hmm,
and they would be there when he came back. And
yeah.
he was not a person that was comfortable with people he didn't know, people
No.
that stuck out their hand and said, "Hi, George, I'm Joe Blow." But once he got to know you, it was a different story. And
Hmm,
so that it was like in theater and in certain movies, the directors work again and again. John Ford worked again and again with the same guys,
hmm,
same actors. Clint Eastwood works with the same editors. He came to us one time after a supervisor had left, Mike Owens, and he said, "Let me talk to Mike." And then we said, "Well, he doesn't work here anymore." And then he said, "Give me his home number," because he was working with Mike. Period.
hmm, yeah.
There was no exception. And so when you work for him, you've got uh, super loyalty. He is
Yeah.
not.
Hmm,
He's not going with anybody else unless they're dead. If they're dead, he'll make an exception.
yeah. Yeah. Um, so are you now fully retired, Bill, or are you involved in any projects or any writing, or do you want to do more
Yeah,
directing? Or
uh, I'm writing a couple of books. One is a kind of a detective story. The other one is
hmm,
about a small valley called Anderson Valley in Northern California, and all the oddball characters that live there, and the
hmm,
stories I've had over the years. From high school drag racing, hot rod cars and chasing girls and drinking beer, all those stories.
hmm,
Um, and I have a small distribution company where I distribute my films,
hmm,
both Nitro and soon to be the Jack Johnson film. So I don't work on other people's films anymore.
I mean, some of those books particularly sound very fascinating. So I'm sure I'll pick them up when they come out, and I'm sure people watching this will want to get their hands on them as well. They sound really fascinating. Well, I wanted to thank you, Bill, for taking so much time to talk to me today, especially as you're not feeling 100%. I really do appreciate it. So I've just had a nice comment saying it was they really enjoyed it. It's a great interview. So I think people enjoyed the evening.
This is something you can edit out all my absences.
Oh yeah, I'll cut some of our I'll cut all the technical issues and all that sort of thing. But I think we got there in the end, and I think we covered some great stuff. So I really enjoyed it. So thanks again,
Thank
Bill.
you for having me.
So so I hope you feel better very soon.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I think I've got one more day maybe, and then I'm
okay. Wonderful. So so thanks again, Bill. I really enjoyed the evening, and have a great week, and take care.
so long.
Yeah, so long. Bye bye. I'll put a link in the YouTube to the book. So I think I'll grab a copy of that myself. I think.
So long.
Take care. So thanks everybody that joined us for this event, and I hope you will join us for events in the future. Take care. Bye.